January 1945. Endgame for Nazi Germany. As the Allies advance on all sides, the 1,000-year Reich, built on illusion and delusion, is crumbling. What now for Adolf Hitler and the band of criminal conspirators around him? This is the story of how the Nazi regime keeps lying to the very end, as it collapses into plots, power struggles, and madness. But there is still time for one last great betrayal of the German people. On the 12th anniversary of the Nazi Party coming to power, Adolf Hitler is preparing to address his people. Outside, battle is raging. The Allies are penetrating Germany, the heart of the Third Reich. The Führer delivers one final rallying cry.
God the Almighty has made our nation. By defending its existence, we are defending His work. The fact that this defense is fraught with incalculable misery, suffering, and hardship makes us even more attached to this nation.
The tone of defiance is the same as ever, but the war is nearly lost.
They're fighting a war on 2-3 fronts. They're starved of any natural resources they previously had. Only a complete fanatic such as Hitler would think there was still a chance.
This will be the last time the German people hear their Führer's voice. What the public can't see is that Hitler is a mere shadow of the man he once was. At just 55, he's suffering from stomach disorders and twitching spasms. An aged grey wreck of a man, increasingly dependent on a sinister quack, Dr. Theodor Morell.
By the turn of the year 44-45, he is a very sick man, Hitler. He is stooped, he's prematurely aged, he's suffering from jaundice, he shakes uncontrollably. At times, his whole body is shook. Other times, it's simply the left side, the left arm particularly. He survives on a cocktail of drugs, which his Dr. Morell gives him.
Despite his pitiful condition and the overwhelming military situation, he still clings to the belief he can win.
Hitler is completely deluded by this point. I mean, he's so out there, he's clearly insane. There's absolutely no way that the German army, depleted of proper weaponry, machines, and, with a vastly reduced manpower, is going to be able to basically turn back this inevitable collapse.
Hitler is pinning his hopes on new miracle weapons. Weapons like the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, capable of nearly 600 miles per hour. And the V-2 rocket, the first ballistic missile and the first man-made object to enter space.
A lot of faith is put into so-called kind of miracle weapons, such as V-2 rockets. But these aren't game changers. These are weapons that are going to cause some harm, but they're not going to cause the Allies to withdraw from the fight.
The jet fighters are produced too late, in too few numbers, and have no impact against the numerically superior Allied air forces. And as German forces retreat, rocket launch sites are captured, preventing them from posing any further threat. For the people in his intimate circle, it is nearing decision time. Men like Hermann Göring, the Führer's long-anointed successor, who had been with him since almost the beginning. For Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, the driving force behind the Holocaust. And Joseph Goebbels, his propaganda chief. Do they stay and go down with the man they'd all sworn to serve? Or do they abandon him and make their own plans?
It's like rats deserting a sinking ship. All of the military people want to give up. Most of the cronies around Hitler, with one or two exceptions, Goebbels being the most prominent, think the game is up as well. And so really, this is sort of waiting for the end.
Joseph Goebbels decides to stand by his Führer. He was the chief architect of the tactic that has enabled the Nazis to fool so many Germans for so long. The trick of making the Nazis look outwardly respectable and noble while hiding the criminal reality.
Goebbels is perhaps the most intellectual of the Nazis, but he was a man who could be very sharp in terms of his sense of realism. Oddly, he sacrifices this sense of realism for his love for the Führer. The Führer can do no wrong.
Despite the hopeless situation, bombed out cities, food shortages, and fears of the advancing Russian Red Army, Goebbels throws all his energy into one final illusion, his most lavish propaganda piece to date.
The best way to look at the mentality of Goebbels at this stage is to look at the premiere of a film called Kolberg. And this is a period drama about the Napoleonic Wars and a brave defense against the Napoleonic army by Prussian defending forces. And he makes this really the big blockbuster of the year, where all these people are fighting this sort of hopeless task, and at the last minute they turn it round and they defeat Napoleon.
The parallels are obvious. German resistance against the odds. Goebbels is creating an alternative reality. If he can't win the war, then he will win at least the movie. He even pulls troops from the Eastern Front to act as extras.
He clearly felt that these soldiers were as usefully deployed, if not more usefully deployed, working for a film like this temporarily, as actually fighting on the front. So it's a real testimony, the financing, the lavish production of the film, the diversion of resources into its imagined huge propaganda value.
The film finally opens on January 30th, 1945, in a temporary cinema under constant threat of air raids, and screens until the fall of Berlin in May 1945. Almost no one sees it.
I think that really sums up the kind of strange world that Goebbels and Hitler occupied at this particular stage. They are the only people who think a film can make any difference to what's going on, and that film doesn't even get distributed around Germany.
But in his own strange way, Goebbels is remaining true to his principles. He is unwavering in his loyalty. But for others, like Himmler and Goering, as Germany collapses, they see chances to feather their own nests. As the relentless Allied advance continues, there can be no doubt that the days of the Thousand-Year Reich are numbered.
Town after town surrenders. For them, the bombing is over.
There's no question that defeat is looming. I mean, this is really, Wagner's Gotterdammerung writ large. Here we have a regime that came to power saying that we'll create a 1,000-year Reich, and now, within 12 short years, it's on the edge of catastrophe.
By February 1945, 196 Russian divisions are attempting to encircle the capital, Berlin.
it's not quite every man for himself, but a lot of people are thinking this is obviously ending, it's ending soon, it's ending badly, and, you know, Christmas 45 is not going to be a Nazi Christmas.
For the circle around the increasingly deluded Hitler, it's time to start making plans for the future. What will become of them when the war is over?
This is a criminal regime from top to bottom. Everyone in some way is tainted by this regime and infected by this regime, and there are few in the Nazi elite who think they are going to escape justice here. They know that unless they try and cover up what's happened and pretend that they were only taking orders from Hitler and they didn't want to do it, then they are going to head for the hangman's noose.
Heinrich Himmler, even by Nazi standards, is a monster. A former chicken farmer, he is a man of petty jealousies and a rabid anti-Semite. He has been at the heart of all the darkest Nazi activities.
He is the man who has organised the sterilisation of the congenitally feeble in the early part of the Third Reich. He's organised the euthanasia of incurably ill and psychiatrically disabled people. He's then been central to the extermination of the Jews.
By 1945, his worst crime, the Holocaust, has become public knowledge. Himmler is personally responsible for the systematic state-sponsored murder of over 6 million people. And he knows that unless he does something to turn his personal situation round, he will be at the top of any list of war criminals when the war is over.
He's seen in some ways as worse than Hitler. And the horrors of the camps are being realised, and they were Himmler's own particular province.
He constructed and controlled a vast network of facilities across the Reich designed to concentrate, hold, and kill Jews on an industrial scale.
Everyone is thinking, you know, the day of reckoning is coming. They know that the Allies are going to put them on trial for what has happened. They've said it long enough. There will be a war trial, and you, criminals, will be brought to book.
From January 1945, Himmler tries to hide the evidence.
The facilities used for extermination, the gas chambers at Auschwitz, for example, are all blown up so that they're not necessarily immediately recognisable for what they are.
As the Russians advance through the occupied territories, Himmler forcibly marches the few surviving prisoners from the death camps in Poland to concentration camps in Germany. But this time, it is not just about covering his tracks. He thinks he's developed a cunning plan.
The reason for the evacuation is not so much a cover-up, it's to maintain control over the Jewish prisoners so that Himmler still has this bargaining chip.
Secretly, he's planning to use the remaining Jews as a means of negotiating a deal for his own survival. He's even hoping to make money from it. Discreetly, he puts the word out that he's open for business.
A number of approaches were made to Himmler, testing the water to see whether he was prepared to release Jews from the concentration camp system in return for money, military material, and so on. Probably the best known of these was from a former president of the Swiss Confederation, Jean-Marie Moussi, who had known Himmler previously from anti-communist activities.
Himmler makes Moussi an offer. He will free some of the Jews he holds in concentration camps in return for 20 million Swiss francs, to be paid by Jewish sources in the US.
It's a measure of the callousness of Himmler that he would use Jewish lives in order to strike some sort of bargain to save, whatever skin he could. This is a man who'd been killing Jews for quite a few years now, in their millions, and now he's, negotiating with a few thousand here and there to get what he wants. It's just disgusting.
Incredibly, Himmler even believes this might be the start of a process that could end with the Allies installing him as the future leader of Germany.
So what Himmler is hoping to get from this is a reputation in the West as somebody who is prepared to do a deal and somebody who it might be worth dealing with into the future.
This is a high-risk strategy for Himmler. Going behind Hitler's back to make money in return for releasing Jews goes against everything Hitler stands for.
It contradicts every notion there'd been since 1922, that the enemy was the Jew, the enemy was international Jewry, and it could never be compromised with. It's a total destruction of the basic belief. It would destroy Nazism.
Incredibly, the first trainload of 1,700 Jews actually makes it to Switzerland. Himmler had been promised a deposit of $250,000. But at this point, news of the plan leaks out, and Himmler has to call the deal off. But it won't be the last time he tries to make a deal behind the Führer's back. As Himmler plots, the military situation continues to deteriorate. Too late to successfully mount any form of serious counterattack or proper defense from the front, Hitler becomes cut off, spending more and more time in his Berlin bunker.
The Red Army has marched all across Europe and is now at the very edge of Germany as well. Everything is going to come home to Hitler in that bunker.
Someone once said, rather aptly, that Hitler had a bunker obsession. He had bunkers on the Western Front, he had a number on the Eastern Front. He has this idea that the bunker is the salvation. If you hide in the ground, things will get better on top eventually.
Above ground, Berlin is no longer safe. In their heaviest raid of the war, 1,500 American bombers dropped 2,000 tons of bombs on the Reich capital. The Chancellery area is badly hit, causing extensive destruction and knocking out the water, electricity, heating, and telephone lines. For Goebbels, this is another opportunity. Exaggerating the numbers killed, here and in other aerial raids, including the infamous Allied bombing of Dresden, he tries to foster a greater sense of public spirit and unity. But by now, no one cares.
Life in Berlin for ordinary people in the final months of the war becomes extraordinarily difficult. The sheer business of survival, of getting food or basic hygiene, becomes so overwhelming that the strategy for survival is all that people can think about at this time.
Although dying in their thousands on a daily basis, the German people are unaware that the man to whom they have pledged allegiance, the Führer, is even now preparing to betray them one last time.
The Nero Decree is this remarkable decision on the part of a very sick man, sick physically and mentally, that if Germany can't come through the war through its own efforts, it must be allowed to be destroyed.
Hitler's Nero Decree orders the wholesale destruction of German infrastructure to prevent its use by the encroaching Allies.
This isn't simply to deprive the Allies of resources, it's to say Germany did not deserve to survive. It's the idea of going down in flames. If defeat is unavoidable, then everything must be destroyed. The Allies must be left nothing.
This action will destroy all hope of the German people having any kind of decent life after he has gone.
Hitler feels really that the German people have let him down and that they deserve, as part of this outcome of the social Darwinian struggle, deserve to die and be sacrificed to the greater forces of history.
By now, beyond the bunker, the Third Reich is little more than a few isolated pockets in northern Europe, northern Italy, and Germany itself. The rest is under occupation and beyond Hitler's reach.
The situation in March and April 1945 in many ways is completely chaotic. There isn't a coherent national picture anymore. People take very little notice at this stage of what goes on in the bunker, of what Hitler might be thinking.
Hiding out of sight of his people in his Berlin bunker, Hitler is still clinging to his delusions. After miracle weapons, he has a new fantasy. The Allies will split.
There had been for some time in Germany a belief that the Allies could not hold, that the unnatural alliance between the West and the East, between the Soviet and the United States, for example, it was so unnatural politically that it wouldn't hold.
On the 12th of April 1945, Hitler believes he has got his miracle. US President Franklin D. Roosevelt dies. Roosevelt himself had done much to smooth the uneasy union between Stalin and the West, and had held the alliance together.
It was an unnatural, unholy alliance, you might say, between capitalist West and Soviet communist East. For how long would it hold? And the Nazi desperate notion is, if the Allies split, there is hope for us.
But it comes to nothing. The alliance holds. The Western Allies give up on the race to Berlin, as it will fall under the Russian sphere of influence after the war, and they shelve their political differences until the unconditional surrender of Germany is achieved. The Red Army is closing in. On Hitler's 56th birthday, Russian long-range artillery starts bombarding Berlin city center. It's now just a matter of time.
There's a very interesting relationship between Hitler and Goebbels in the last months of the war. Goebbels spoke to him about the need to try to find a diplomatic solution to the war. But at the end, he had to concede that he couldn't change Hitler's set determination to continue the war militarily to the bitter end and, if necessary, to defeat.
As the Red Army advances on Berlin, preparations are being made for Hitler's 56th birthday. On previous occasions, this has been a monumental event, a public occasion.
Hitler's birthday has been one of celebration. A time for gaiety, a time for fun, as far as the Nazis ever engaged in fun. By 45, of course, the world has changed. Germany is heading for defeat, and everybody, including Hitler, knows this by his birthday.
Rising late, around 11 a.m. to the sound of heavy artillery shelling, the Führer's birthday celebrations are a mournful affair, despite the presence of his long-term companion, Eva Braun.
And there's some attempt at jollity. It's all terribly artificial, and there's a deep sense of gloom that hovers over the whole proceedings. But a cake is made for him. He literally plays with soldiers, little toy soldiers that he loved.
This bizarre occasion will turn out to be the last great gathering of the Nazi elite.
The birthday party is kind of a tragic scene. It's a bit like sort of, you know, people camping around the oxygen tent of a father they don't really like, but they all might get something from his will.
As part of the celebrations, Goebbels sets up a photo opportunity, persuading Hitler to leave the bunker and inspect a group of decorated Hitler youth. It will be his last public appearance. But so powerful is his grip on the nation that even now the illusion remains in place. Young boys are prepared to die for him in the hopeless defense of Berlin.
They line up, this sad line-up of young men, and he goes along the line, this stooped figure, and pulling at the cheeks some of the lads and patting them on the cheeks and saying, you're a great hero of Germany. It's almost bad theatre. Perhaps it is bad theatre. He must have known the cause was lost. But he chats to the lads, he speaks to them as if they were the heroes of the future, as if there's some hope for them.
For those around Hitler, for all the show of unity, it is now time to act.
If Germany was going to survive after the Second World War, in any way, shape or form, the army had to survive. And if the army survived, they needed a potential leader.
Outwardly, Hermann Goering, deputy leader of the party, remains loyal to his Führer. He had been with Hitler from the very beginning. He had led the brown shirts, fought in the attempted coup in 1923, built up and led the Nazis' air force. He is also a morphine addict. But increasingly, he has been marginalized.
Goering falls out of favour because of what happens in the war itself. The Luftwaffe doesn't perform very well. Where were all these fighter planes that he'd promised? Where were all these massive bombers that he'd promised? So it seemed as though he hadn't delivered in so many areas, and that's why he started to sink down the hierarchy.
Nonetheless, he is still officially Hitler's nominated successor, and he believes when the Führer is gone, he can cut a deal.
I think Goering believes that the Allies are as sort of flexible as he is. Politicians who can be negotiated with. He thinks of these people as people who've changed their mind before. Why won't they change their mind again? Maybe this unconditional surrender is negotiable.
Even before the party is over, Goering is packing his bags. After a few vague words and a handshake, he leaves the birthday celebrations and heads for Berchtesgaden in the Bavarian Alps, safer and closer to the American lines. After swearing an oath of loyalty, Heinrich Himmler also leaves the party.
I don't think anyone really understood at that point that Hitler was just going to stay in Berlin and go down in flames. So Himmler has to maintain the facade that he is loyal, that he's still working for the cause, although clearly by then he'd decided that it was all over.
Himmler is in fact pursuing a new angle of negotiation. He has made contact with the vice president of the Swedish Red Cross, Count Folke Bernadotte, and is secretly maneuvering to increase his power and take over.
What Bernadotte is looking for is the release of Scandinavian, Western European Jewish prisoners from the concentration camp system. Negotiations, including several face-to-face meetings between Himmler and Bernadotte, take place over the next few weeks, really leading up until the end of April 1945.
His plan is to position himself as the reasonable Nazi, the person who the Allies can do business with.
He sees only one way out, and that is a negotiated settlement, with himself possibly as the chief negotiator and therefore the leader of the reformed Germany that will emerge.
It's a measure of the kind of pie-in-the-sky attitude that some of these Nazis have towards the war, that both Himmler and Goering feel that there's some sense in kind of cutting a deal with the Allies or even kind of taking over the rapidly disintegrating German state.
As for Hitler, he is now left in his bunker, completely unaware of the plans being made by his loyal followers. With him are only Goebbels and Martin Bormann, his private secretary, a long-standing Nazi thug who has quietly been ingratiating himself with the Führer. As the war around Berlin continues to rage, discipline in the bunker starts to break down.
The scenes within the bunker underneath the Chancellery are a vision out of hell, really. It's crowded, it's sweaty, it's hot. People are kind of disobeying Hitler by kind of smoking rather a lot. There's a lot of drunkenness, and it's a kind of microcosm for the whole kind of madness of what the Third Reich's been about.
Living in a bizarre fantasy, Hitler appoints, promotes, and relieves generals at whim. And he lays ludicrous plans for a final decisive victory, to be led by General Steiner, a former SS commander.
He puts his faith in two armies, which didn't exist by this time, but he believes they do. That between them, they will form some sort of pincer movement, enclosing themselves around Berlin, breaking the Soviet grip and preventing the Allies coming from the West. It's a total delusion by this time, but he believes in it.
But just 2 days after his birthday, Berlin's inner circle of defenses are breached. The Soviet forces almost encircle the city. Worse still, without sufficient resources, Steiner is unable to launch his attack. News reaches the bunker.
He's told by his generals that the game is completely up, Berlin cannot be defended, and the Red Army will be in the bunker within 24 hours.
And it's then he goes very quiet for some minutes and then has this huge outburst of anger. He expresses his detestation for the generals who'd led him into this position, for the men who've let him down, men who won't die in the cause, prefer to give up and withdraw.
He rants and he raves about how the generals let him down throughout the war and how now all the people are deserting this sinking ship.
Critically, he also says that everyone might as well go home. He has no further orders. Everyone present takes this as his abdication. Hitler is no longer the Führer. But no one tells the people of Germany. In the streets above the bunker, what's left of the population, young boys and old men, have been called up to continue the increasingly desperate defense of Berlin.
There are very strict Führer's orders not to surrender, to fight literally to the last man. And that is, of course, in many ways what does happen in Berlin, where there is street-to-street fighting. Even today, if you walk through Berlin, you can still see bullet holes on many of the buildings from those final days of the war.
In Berchtesgaden, news of Hitler's breakdown reaches Goering. He assumes Hitler is now unwilling or incapable of leading the party.
The Hitler that he used to know in the early part of the Munich period no longer exists. This is an empty shell of a man.
So, on the basis of the long-standing succession law, this means he can take over.
He sends a telegram to Hitler saying, look, the game is up, you are trapped in Berlin, for the sake of the German Reich, give me the party officers as your deputy to take over as Führer, and I'll do my best to negotiate our way to the end of this war.
But back in Berlin, Goering's telegram falls into the wrong hands.
It's intercepted by Martin Bormann, who then takes this telegram in sort of Uriah Heep mode, presents it to him and says, look, he's plotting against you. We have not finished the war. There's still a chance even now that things can be turned around. Hitler can't believe it.
Extraordinarily, with the war all but lost, Bormann now sees an opportunity for his own advancement and his chance to take over the Reich. With Goering out of the way, he can win promotion. So he convinces Hitler of Goering's treachery and persuades the Führer to arrest and eject him from the party. This is all the more ridiculous because just 3 days after Hitler's critical outburst towards his generals, Russian forces link up, completing their ring around the city. An hour later, Russian and US forces meet up, splitting the Reich in half. Himmler also hears the news of the Führer's supposed abdication, and through Bernadotte writes a letter to the Western Allies.
Himmler puts his cards on the table with Bernadotte that it's all over.
He now styles himself the provisional leader of Germany and is hoping for peace with the British and Americans and an alliance against the Soviets.
Himmler saw possibility that, as the man in control of the SS and the police, that he could maintain stability within Germany, he could prevent a sort of meltdown. He still saw himself as an important man, that's the key to it, and that he had influence within Germany.
But in Stockholm, the letter is leaked to the international press. The negotiations are immediately broken off.
The fallout for Himmler of this peace offer emerging is that he is immediately dismissed from all of his posts within the German government.
The full extent of Himmler's betrayal is revealed to Hitler.
I think it was a big personal blow for Hitler. He had assumed that of all the members of the Nazi hierarchy, Himmler was the one who was least likely to betray him.
Alone and with no more options, he writes his last will and testament. Despite Himmler and Goering, the head of the Navy, Admiral Dönitz, is appointed Reich president. Goebbels and Bormann are rewarded for their loyalty. Goebbels becomes Chancellor, effectively Prime Minister. And Bormann is made head of the Nazi Party. Though, of course, there is no Reich to be Prime Minister of, and no Nazi Party worth leading. Hitler's final act is to marry his long-standing partner, Eva Braun.
As if things couldn't get more kind of Shakespearean and tragic in the bunker, you've then got this farcical marriage ceremony that takes place between Hitler and his long-term girlfriend, Eva Braun, who had actually been largely hidden from view from the German public. It's obviously a kind of sop to Eva Braun, something he'd always promised that he would give her his hand in marriage.
It's her bonus, I think someone called it, the marriage. It's his way of saying to her, you have honoured your position as my associate. I'm prepared to make you my wife. Something I've always denied myself because I was married to Germany.
He gives her a kiss in front of his acolytes. He's never done that before. The next day, we see that he has a final meal with his secretaries. He thanks them as well. He moves away. There's a tearful sort of interchange.
Shortly after 3 p.m., Hitler and new wife Eva withdraw to his private apartment in the bunker. He hands her a cyanide capsule. The decision has been made. They will end their lives together. She takes the poison, and he shoots himself with his Walther PPK.
It's a brutal, nasty end, and entirely fitting, frankly.
Adolf Hitler is dead by his own hand. Betrayed by his most favored henchman, the regime is in its death throes. But even so, the German people are told one last lie.
Führer headquarters reports that our Führer Adolf Hitler fell this afternoon in his command post in the Chancellery whilst fighting against Bolshevism to his last breath.
The final Nazi lie is the fact that Hitler has gone down fighting in the streets of Berlin. Of course, it's completely untrue.
The news of Hitler's death doesn't necessarily come as the big shock that we might imagine it to have been today. People in the final months of the war have become so preoccupied with the business of day-to-day survival that ideology and with it the person of Hitler have really taken a bit of a back seat. There are famous stories that refugees from the East are arriving in Lübeck and in Hamburg and being greeted by Red Cross helpers with the sentence, "Hitler's dead, would you like some hot soup?" And the second half of that sentence was infinitely more important than the first.
Meanwhile, the Nazi government descends into farce. Besides Hitler's appointed leader, Admiral Dönitz, Himmler, Goering, and Goebbels are all independently trying to negotiate peace deals. In Berlin, Goebbels is officially the Chancellor of Germany. At the 11th hour, he tries and fails to negotiate an arrangement with Marshal Zhukov, the leader of the Russian forces.
Goebbels' last overture to Zhukov has the sense of a last desperate throw of the dice. One, I think, without any hope of seeing anything come from it either.
The Russians reject his approach. For Goebbels, it is now truly over.
I think all the way through Goebbels' career, he's been so loyal to Hitler. He sees him as some kind of demigod. He's been his kind of promoter, his spin doctor, his propagandist. So he looks forward to a Germany without Hitler and without the Nazi Party with absolute horror. He doesn't want to live in this society.
Goebbels and his wife Magda now commit a terrible crime. They poison their own children.
The willingness of a woman to destroy her own family because National Socialism had failed. That shows the inhumanity and absurdity of Nazism. In its death throes, it took down 6 innocent children. Even the lives of the innocent are to be sacrificed. There is no humanity you can turn to once Nazism has failed.
With their children dead, they kill themselves. As for Himmler, his attempt to negotiate a deal via contacts in Sweden has also collapsed. With no role left to play and cut loose from the party, he tries to lose himself within the hordes of POWs, but is spotted at a British Army checkpoint.
Himmler is taken off for interrogation, and during the course of this, he takes his little round glasses out, puts them on his face, and says, "Heinrich Himmler." And they realise they've caught the big fish.
An empty brass cyanide case is found, which initiates a full-body search.
As the doctor goes for his mouth to hold it open, Himmler bit him, stepped back, took the capsule out of his tooth where it had been concealed, bit down on it,
In an attempt to flush the cyanide from his body, doctors repeatedly force him to vomit.
There's too much poison in his system, and he dies in agony on the floor of a British Army interrogation cell, wearing an old British Army shirt and nothing else.
In Bavaria, with his main rivals out of the way, Goering, the great survivor and pretender, makes his move.
They're all going down, the whole thing's going to pieces, but you know, I think if I get in a room with people, I can survive this. And I think that exemplifies his personality. He felt he was one of life's survivors, that his big personality would get him through.
Having drafted a letter to the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, he surrenders to the Americans in a blaze of media publicity. Goering expects to be treated with all the courtesy of a head of state.
There are some people in this world who, they've got an inner confidence in themselves, you know, and he's one of them. Even his arrest is something of a triumph, isn't it, for this man? And it goes back to this idea of himself as a survivor. He is going to somehow extricate himself from all of this mayhem. He's going to sit around drinking schnapps with the Allied generals, and he's going to say to them, well, you know, all of this wasn't my responsibility, not me.
But Eisenhower won't see him, and now he's just another prisoner of war. In Berlin, there is just one man left, Martin Bormann, the official head of the Nazi Party. Leaving the Chancellery, he makes a run for it, but is caught up in the fighting and killed. And so the Thousand-Year Reich and its criminal leaders meet their fate. On May 7th, 1945, Germany finally surrenders unconditionally.